I'm not trying to steer anybody out of here, but I just do want to hold up to you that there is another offering for Christian formation this morning that Nathan Hayden is going to lead in the Elliott Room, and he's going to focus on the Holy Eucharist and talk a little bit about the significance and meaning of that. So if you have any interest in being part of that, then you're welcome to do that. Well, good morning. It's wonderful to see all of you and to have the smell of bacon and be part of the 8 o'clock service again and to be gathering around these tables. I'm glad that you're here. So today our gospel lesson focuses on or at least the part of the gospel lesson that I chose for us to focus on has to do with how we come together and the gathering centered around what Jesus says at the end of the gospel reading. If you've already been to church, if you haven't, you'll see at the end of it, he talks about where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. So this is part of how we gather and how we come together in the name of Jesus in this place. I think it's important. I think it's very important right now. And so anyway, the ways in which we are able to connect in community and be together and form community, I am finding is more and more not only important, but I think it's becoming an imperative as we hear about more and more people who are experiencing depression, loneliness, isolation, and are having limited either social contact or meaningful contact outside of themselves or their homes. So I just want to again hold this up, and I'm so glad that you all are here. I hope you'll continue to come and be part of what we do at this time together on Sundays and at other times. I do also just want to make a pitch for another opportunity to eat breakfast that will happen on Tuesday morning of this week. Matt Bouchard and a group of men will be starting very early on Tuesday morning preparing a breakfast. And this is the annual breakfast in which we recognize and honor first responders here in Ladue, Frontenac, various municipalities.
We have a lot of women on our team, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'm sorry. I apologize. In fact, it's no longer even going to be referred to as the men's breakfast group anymore. It is now just called the Tuesday morning breakfast group. So it meets monthly, and this is the first one of this season, and it is for first responders. So again, even if you can't stay for breakfast, it's a nice time to come by and just say thank you, and for us to be a presence as a church to show our gratitude and appreciation and support for those who do a lot in the various communities that surround here. And I think there are like 50-something of them who will be here, and it begins at 7:15. All right, so this morning I wanted us to have a little bit of a conversation that somewhat centers around an article that some of you may have read or seen. Written recently by David Brooks that appeared in the Atlantic. It was an article that several people actually had sent to me to say, if you haven't read this, then it's lengthy. It's actually very lengthy, but it's worth reading. And so I wanted us to just have a little bit of a conversation as we're thinking today about community and about the importance of community and about being connected. About one of the things that he, and not only he, but others have pointed out that seems to be an issue or becoming more of an issue in our culture and in our society. And the gist of his article is that we seem to be becoming, one of the tendencies that we seem to be exhibiting more and more is meanness. And intolerance. And I don't know about you, but I have certainly experienced that. And I love St. Louis. I've lived here now for almost 2 years. This is a wonderful place to live. But one of the things that I've noticed since I've lived here is that if I don't immediately push my accelerator at a green light, this is what I get. And when I moved here from a city of 50,000 people in Kansas, which was the smallest place I'd ever lived, I'd only lived in larger metropolitan areas like this. And in Salina, Kansas, you can sit through 3 cycles of a light and nobody will blow their horn, and you will never see this on any day. And so I just use that as kind of a lighthearted way of saying, and there are times recently when I've experienced things in traffic and in other places where I truly had no idea why I was seeing this. I mean, if you experience that, you kind of wonder, well, what did I do? If I did something to you, I'm happy to apologize. And there have been a few times when I've wanted to just stop and say, look, and I'm sorry, I just got distracted or whatever. So I think what David Brooks is pointing to is certainly goes beyond, what we've all experienced or heard of or seen in some ways that often now seems to result in kind of the extreme of road rage and violence in which, unfortunately, lives have been lost because of things that seem to be so almost meaningless or inconsequential that result in this over-the-top these over-the-top emotional reactions. So I wanted us just to have a little bit of a conversation and think through some of the things that he talks about. Help. Am I going the wrong way? It's up to you, Connor. Some of the things that he focuses on in his article, and then a few other things that some other people have had to say about that, and then I hope we can have some conversation. So he points to the fact that there has been this significant rise in hate crimes over the last several years. He goes back to 2020, and that we're now at one of the highest levels that we've experienced in quite a while. Increased homicide, murder rates, increased gun sales, and that our overall sense of social trust seems to be continuing to decline. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Words that define our age, and I think he's right about this. We see and read about these and hear these words used in a variety of ways now. Conspiracy, polarization, mass shootings, trauma, safe spaces. I heard something recently. Oh, it was with regard to education. There was a group that somebody was talking about how now and you all may know this, or maybe I'm just behind how now in some schools they're actually establishing almost like a safe room. Where everyone can go instead of them just kind of having to hunker down in their classes. They're creating these safe rooms, and I thought, wow, that obviously in response to the trauma and the tragedies that we've seen in too many schools. And so we all are aware of some of these things, and I would suggest that to some degree with some of this we've almost become so used to it that we don't react in the same ways. I mean, someone reminded me this morning after the 8 o'clock service that today's the 11th, so asking if we had included in the prayers anything about September 11th. And I had to say, we didn't. Unfortunately, we didn't. We become, of course, there's been obviously some period of time. What we did remember was the unfortunate and tragic accident that took the lives of 3 students at Ladue High School. But we're just continually, faced with these different things that, as Brooks points out, seem to be defining this period of time that we're living in. And that we often just throw around either politically or socially or in whatever way. He says we're enmeshed in some sort of emotional, relational, and then obviously part of why I wanted to bring this before us was emotional, relational, and spiritual crisis. So I would commend his article to you. As I said, it's a long article, and the gist of it is that his argument is that we've lost our moral compass. and that we're not providing the same type of moral foundation, the same type of moral instruction, teaching, and of course all of this can be debated and argued and talked about, and there'll be different points, but this is just one person's opinion. But that we've become enmeshed in some sort of emotional, relational, and spiritual crisis. And so he points out that how over the last several years, there have been different reasons that have been thrown out for why we're dealing with so much meanness, why we're dealing with so much hatred. Of course, there's the usual now of social media and how social media, as he says, is driving us crazy. I think if you deal with or on social media in any way, you can see some very positive and helpful and constructive things, and some things that are just things. But you can also see to some degree how people do use it as a weapon sometimes, and do use it to express things that do seem to contribute to us becoming more polarized. We've stopped participating in community organizations, and we have become more isolated. Again, part of what you'll hear me preach today about is what I think is becoming even more and more an important thing for us to consider as a community of faith, is how we come together and how we're connected through the church and through this church. And if and we've seen this happening, this stopping this decrease in participation in community organizations, that's been going on now for some time. If you look at, I've been a member of Rotary for a long time, and I know that the St. Louis Rotary Club that I'm part of now, at one point had about 500 members, and now there are about 150. There's a great book that's called, written by a sociologist at Harvard, called Bowling Alone, in which he talks about the decline in participation in various organizations, and that how people used to come together. The premise of the title of the book is based on how people used to come together and participate in bowling leagues, and how that was one of the first things that he began to notice declined. And so you see that not only in community organizations, but that's part of what has begun to happen over the last 20, 25 years in the church as well. So often those types of things mirror each other. And then the demography story, that there are many people who are becoming many white Americans, and in this room this morning, that's all we've got. Many of us are feeling anxious, and in some cases panicked by the fact that all of the demographic studies show that we are moving more and more towards becoming, it's called the browning of America, and that is producing some of the meanness and the hatred, because we are no longer going to be a nation that's dominated by the white race. And then the economic story, inequality, insecurity. We've seen various fluctuations, some of which have been rather severe in the economy, and in other ways that have produced fear, alienation, pressure that puts people right on the edge, and contributes to this sense of meanness and this sense of hatred. And so, we all have things, I think, that we probably have experienced in this way, through some of this in one way or the other. Some of you may have heard me talk about, because I've experienced it a lot in a position that I held before I came to St. Peter's. I traveled weekly all over the country. And those of you who travel by airplane know that being in an airport and being on airplanes now is where you see a lot of what he's talking about. Josh Schaefer, who travels a lot, is shaking his head. People are literally right on the edge. And it almost takes nothing to get someone over that edge, either standing in a security line, or when they board a plane, or even just walking through the airport. It's in many places it's almost become almost a toxic environment. And I think that and he doesn't necessarily reference that, but that's one of the things that one of the places that I've seen that a lot. The most important story, he feels, is about why Americans have become sad and alienated, rude, mean, is what he refers to as being the simplest. Is, again, that we now are part of a society in which we're no longer trained how to treat people. That we don't treat people, we're not being trained, informed, and shaped to treat people with kindness and consideration. And again, I think that's where what we do when we come together for worship, for prayer, for formation, for conversation, for fellowship. I think that's one of the things that we have to offer. And as he goes on to point out that in a healthy society, families, schools, religious groups, community organizations help form people. I mean, he's living into my argument. And as being the kind of people who do show up for each other, who support each other, who even when you disagree, and again, in the gospel lesson for today, when Jesus talks about where 2 or 3 are gathered together, they're doing it in my name, it's in the context of Jesus talking about sin and about forgiveness and about how important it is to be reconciled. And so Brooks is saying that that's part of what being involved in a church is all about. Is helping to form people, to shape people, and help us all think about being the kind of people who do show up for each other and who do support each other, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through... I mean, I don't know how often we think about this, but think about where other than here can you sit next to somebody that you may not have ever met before and kneel down next to them and confess your sins. And then walk up to, where am I? That altar rail and kneel beside that same person and receive the body and blood of Jesus. And you've never met that person before. Entering into one of the holiest and most sacred things that you can do as a person of faith. There are no other places where you can do that. You're not given the opportunity to form those types of bonds with people that you may not have ever met. And then the thing about being involved in Christian community is saying that we will show up for one another. Through St. Peter's Cares, where we say if you need a meal while you're sick, or if you need someone to pray for you, if you need someone to help you to get somewhere, we can help provide that. There's a group of people who show up here every Friday morning who spend time praying for anyone that they've been asked to pray for. And so those are the types of things that Brooks says that in a healthy society, not only the church, but other institutions, families, schools, community organizations, that's what should be happening, and we've begun to lose some of that. Our society, he says, has become one in which people feel licensed to give their selfishness free rein. It's all about me, all right? It's all about David. Sorry to hear about that, bud, but I got my issues, okay? And the result, he says, seems to be that we become a society of people who think that it is all about me, that I am the center of the universe, and then it becomes, I don't have the ability or the capacity to be able to think about or show concern for anyone else because I'm so focused on me. And then, as I mentioned a while ago, he says that we live in a society that he labels as having become terrible at moral formation. And in his article, he goes through a rather lengthy he goes through the history of how he feels like there was a time when we did this in a much different way and in a better way, but that now we have lost again our moral compass. We've lost our center, and we are not forming and shaping our children. And we're not involved. We are not as involved in moral formation as we once were. He says that moral formation is best when it's humble. It's about giving people skills and habits that will help them to be considered, help them to get out of it being just about me, and helping to bring people in so that they feel respected. So no matter who they are, how it is that they may be, what they may be dealing with, to bring people into the circle. And he says that's very different from how we treat people now, in ways that he says are making people feel sad and lonely, and that make them then grow unkind. And again, what we're seeing, and what all of the research is showing, is that we're continuing to make this dramatic slide with people who are feeling lonely, isolated, depressed, anxious, and who are not connected in any way. And he says he feels like that this is why that we're pushing people into feeling sad and lonely, and then that's why we're seeing some of this meanness and seeing some of the hatred that we're experiencing. So this was kind of an interesting thing that I came across. It's called the Mean Index, and it rates every state in the country. So as you can see, we're not doing real well. We are about, according to this Mean Index, and what they use to come up with the Mean Index is school bullying ranking, toxic internet troll comments, customer politeness score, residents who volunteer, people who volunteer, how many people in each state volunteer, give of themselves in some way as volunteers, and then how many hate groups per 100,000 people there are in each state. And so Missouri's Mean Index score is 67.5, which ranks us as the 12th meanest state in the United States. So there you have it. I knew somebody would ask me that. I don't know. I kind of got distracted with where Missouri was. When I first saw this, I was thinking, please let it be down at least below the 25. But anyway, I just thought this was kind of some interesting things here about these toxic internet troll comments, and then customer politeness score. How many people? And they have all of these are done through studies and research that show, that if Isaac calls up and is dealing with, something that he wants, changed on his bill, how big of a jerk is he? That basically is what it comes out is the customer politeness type scores, and then how friendly is the other person. So that's how they measure that. Now Isaac would never do that because he's a very gentle, nice guy, but. Bill Leonard is the former dean of the Divinity School at Wake Forest University, and he's also written some things about how our culture, he says, has gone. Not only he says has gone mean, but it's gone mad. Social media seems to be a fountain of meanness. Again, filled with attacks and threats and lies and misinformation. And then he goes on to talk about and help us to try to think about the church. What about the church, he says? Doesn't the gospel call us to resist this meanness, no matter whether it's personal meanness, corporate meanness, or church meanness? And then he poses a really interesting question that a good bit of the data actually supports. Are people deserting or avoiding church affiliation today because of this? And what we now know is that is true. That what especially younger generations are saying, that when they think about the church, the institutional church, what they think about are churches who are taking political stands on this issue or that issue, churches that seem to be in conflict, and so all of what Bill is pointing out here is actually being supported by the data, and it's not necessarily exacerbating their flight, but it is that, but it's also that they just never even come in the doors because they associate it with being divisive and polarizing and not being welcoming and inclusive in a place that they want to be a part of. Timothy Egan, who writes for the New York Times, has also written about meanness, and he talks about tribalism and the corrosive hatreds that go with it have always, he says, kind of been right below the surface in our society, which has been formed on multi-ethnic, in a multi-ethnic way, but as of late, it's now contributing to how we're interacting with each other, and that it is come up from below the surface. And I think some of that is connected to some of the concern or the fear on the part of many who are white in our country that well, this is not necessarily what we want. We want to preserve our sense of identity, our sense of power, our sense of control. Okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your experiences with meanness, with hatred. And remember that you're going to have a microphone.
Specifically this microphone.
So do you agree with this? Do you think that we have become that we are becoming mean?
No.
I think that I would dispute that Americans are becoming mean. I think we have become tremendously divided, and I think I'm one of the few people probably in this room who has absolutely no social media presence. I just don't do it. Okay. So, so I can't really speak to social media. I can speak to news media, which I think is tremendously divisive, and and that supports its own economic business models because that's where they get their money, and their influence. So, but what I think is that, and I do agree with the idea of tribalism being kind of a real problem, but we're being, a lot of people I know are being sort of guided into that by the divisiveness of the way our media interacts with us. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is that we don't become mean, or I think it's more like impatient, in your experience at the stoplight. As long as we keep looking at people and interacting with people on an individual basis, if we start putting people, in our own mind in separate, tribal interest groups or whatever it is, it's easy to not be part of that. But if you can look at people as individuals and ask yourself, how would I want to be treated in that way, and you go ahead and treat them the way you would want to be treated, then I think we will maybe be able to darn our social fabric so that it's not fraying in the middle and along the edges, which it is. Mm-hmm. But I think, we've sort of shot ourselves in the foot by allowing our media sources to sort of get us running in that direction. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Rich.
I want to build on that in a couple ways. But first, David, do you know the difference between a polite honk and a non-polite honk? I come out of the Northeast.
I do
and-
very much know the difference. And I hadn't been getting any of the polite honks.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't me then, because I try to do that polite honk.
No, what I'm getting is that. What I'm getting is that. And there's never a polite honk connected with that.
Okay, but I do want to build on this and a couple of things that I have in mind. I grew up in the Northeast liberal bubble, which was an echo chamber. And I was home a few summers ago, and the town I grew up in was really much more like rural Missouri, even though the dominant voice was often the liberal echo chamber. And now the town I grew up in has become more fancy. All these people moved in from the outside. And my brother lives in that town in the house where I grew up, and I was at a summer party, and I said, I'm from Missouri. And someone who spends a lot of time in Kenya looked at me and said, wow, what's it like being in Missouri? And I said, I can't assume that everybody thinks the same way I do. And I think one reason we might show up more mean is because we are in fact really diverse in a number of ways. And so what I hold out, because I think the way we frame a problem influences how we respond, is I think of that, I think it's a Yeats poem, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. And what I hold out is that at Missouri we are at the center. And I believe that we can hold. But it starts with what you're talking about, and that's being present to people who are very different from us.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is just a statement. I was watching television this morning before I came to church. And there was a program at which Howard Schultz, I think is his name, the CEO of Starbucks, am I correct? I think that have his name correct. But he was not only talking about his company and what he is conceiving as incorrect information that's being shot around the world about his company, but he also was going to run as an independent for president. And he backed out because both the Democrats and the Republicans were so nasty to him that he said he just wanted no part of that. And he said, the worst thing is I'm a Democrat, and the Democrats were worse than the Republicans. And it just said something to me. There's something wrong at the top. Not only here, not only here, but in all levels, but it also is really bad at the top. Anyway, just a statement.
Thank you. Back in the back.
Hi, everybody. My name's Janet Hyde, and I'm kind of new here, so I thought I'd introduce myself. Thank you. There's no doubt about the increase in meanness, so I'm really glad that you took the topic up today. And of course, we hear constantly about the mental health crisis for adolescents and the epidemic of loneliness and so on. And every time I read one of those articles, I want to say, if you would just come to church, we could help with that, really. So one of the questions for me, and I think you were just saying, David, about people not walking in the door because they have these bad images of what the church represents. A lot of that comes from evangelical Protestants and rigid stances that they have. So the question is, how can we advertise the Episcopal Church as a wonderful place for people to escape loneliness, to escape despair, and so on, that we can really do some wonderful things and also help with moral formation?
Yeah. Well, and by the way, Janet, welcome again. It's been nice to have you here. Janet has just recently moved to St. Louis. I think what you're pointing out is something that we as a denomination, and certainly we in this church, have thought about and need to think about in a more intentional way. I think one of the beauties of our tradition has been that we do have a lot to offer, and we are able to be more flexible, even at times when we've disagreed with each other, and still try to maintain and hold the center to some degree. And again, that's part of what today's gospel lesson is all about. You know, it's about being able to be reconciled to each other. But I think one of the things that we've not done very well at all is what you're talking about. You know, whereas some other churches really take very seriously the idea of getting the word out about who they are and what they do and what they believe in, and trying to bring people in. We just historically have not done that very well. We've basically operated under the idea that, you know, we have beautiful churches, which most of ours are. We have beautiful worship and liturgy. We often have wonderful music, as we do. And if you want to come be part of that, we'd love to have you. You know, then that's been kind of it. And so I think the opportunity to be more intentional about saying, this is who we are, and this is what we have done. We welcome you wherever you are at your stage of life journey, faith journey, life journey, and we welcome that, and we want you to be part of this. It's something that we need to find ways to do in a more intentional way.
I'll be very brief. It's just if you imagine yourself in a checkout line and you get to where the checkout person has got a face that's definitely ready for trouble and there's nothing been gone good that morning. It's only a few words that you say that cheer them up. And you can see the whole change of the face, and you can see that she's happy with the person that comes behind you. It takes no effort at all to change somebody around.
You are absolutely right. Words are sometimes just a smile.
Yeah.
Is remarkable what a difference. You're right. What a difference that can make. Yeah. There's one more. I think we probably have time for about one more.
My name is Dudley Grove, and I did that on purpose, and I think we need to spend more time wearing, I'm going to go get my name tag when I get home, or make one if I can't find it. I think we come into St. Peter's and we see our friends, and so we talk to our friends when there are people that are coming into St. Peter's that aren't a part of a 50-year history. You know, they're new last month or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And I think that if each of us was more aware of, if I don't know that person's name, or introduce yourself, or try and figure out some way to expand our smaller circles into a bigger one, that would be a first step in. Because this place is wonderful and the people are fabulous, but I don't think we all know each other very well.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for being part of this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless you.